Welcome to Mental Health, the Crisis in Our Time. My name is Ann Bergen. I'm the host of this series of programs with the purpose of calling attention to the mental health epidemic that is truly an epidemic, as evidenced by increasing rates of anxiety, depression, suicides, eating disorders, gaming issues, porn addiction, gambling addiction now we're seeing with young people. It is truly an epidemic. And it impacts all ages. It impacts across all socioeconomic levels. And it doesn't just impact the individuals who are living with mental health issues. It impacts their families, all who love them. And then if you look at it from a practical level, the cost of dealing with mental health issues to our country are in the billions and billions of dollars every single year. But today the focus is going to be on literacy, particularly reading issues around young children in our schools. The research is really pretty clear. Reading levels are plummeting, and we're seeing it. It's not just because of COVID. This was before COVID reared its ugly head. So then your question might say, well, what does this have to do with mental health? Mm-hmm. Well, it turns out a lot. And for me, being a former reading specialist, an elementary principal, middle school principal, my concern over the last years has been on the mental health epidemic. I have read about too many of my former students who have ended their lives, who have suffered overdoses, and whose lives have been derailed. But I never made the connection between reading, learning disorders or learning issues, and its impact on mental health. I just never fully comprehended it. But now the data is so clear because you can see the link between those who have reading issues and then the risk of anxiety, depression, low self-esteem. And when you look at dyslexia, which is sort of, and our guest today is going to be talking a little more about and defining what that is 15 to 20% of Americans are living with that reading issue. And we know that young people who live with dyslexia are graduating at a rate 20% lower than average. And then with that, with all of those reading and learning issues comes shame, frustration, feelings of worthlessness. And then we see this huge connection between learning issues and substance misuse. So, and then finally, there's the other issue of in America today, those who surfacing around those who can read, but just don't. And then we know when there's that void, the consequences are ignorance and even worse, intolerance. So we really have to shed light on the literacy issue. And so I am so grateful to my guest today, Joanne Spillane, who is here. I've known her for, almost 50 years or so, but we're still young.
Yeah,
we're not old.
We met at the age of 2.
Yes, we met at the age of 2. But you've spent your whole professional life as an educator, working with young people, particularly in the area of reading. But then now lately you've become an advocate. So can you give us a little bit around literacy? Can you give us a little bit about your background? Tell us who you are. Who is
Sure.
Joanne Spillane, my friend?
Yes, besides being your friend, just to give a little bit of my educational background,
Yeah.
I graduated from Emmanuel College way back a million years ago, taught school like 4th, 5th, 6th grade for lots of years.
Mm-hmm.
Then when I ended up getting a master's in counseling psychology later, and my most recent degree, which was 20 years ago, was in reading, language, and literacy.
I forgot you had the counseling
Yeah,
background
yeah,
too, so
yeah.
that's that combination, right? Yeah.
Well, and anyway, so I thought I could make more effective changes if I became an expert in teaching kids how to read. So I went to a well-known university,
Yeah.
I won't name names here, in Boston, and graduated from that school and did practicums. And I'm doing my practicums in inner city schools in Boston and realizing I can be hired as a reading specialist in any of these schools, suburban schools, city schools, yet I don't know how to teach reading.
Yeah.
I know a lot of lingo, but I do not know how to teach a child that does not know how to read.
Yeah.
So I was like, wow, that kind of made me take a step back. And I said, I want to learn how to teach kids how to read. So I did some research and I ended up at the Carroll School in Lincoln, which is a school for dyslexic kids. And they had a year-long program that you could apply to and learn their method of teaching
Can you
reading.
just define, when we hear the word dyslexic,
Yeah.
and people sometimes don't quite know what that means, can you just give us just a broad general definition, because it's a word we're going to be, is just another word for just a severe
language-based disability.
Okay, that's it.
And it covers so many
Okay,
things. So
got it.
I don't like to, a lot of people think dyslexic means, oh, she reversed, the word was and she said saw because she reversed the letters. Oh, no, and that's not even that with a lot of kids. Kids that have dyslexia, have extreme difficulty reading. They have extreme difficulty writing. Oftentimes, a lot of dyslexic kids are very, very bright, and
yeah, absolutely.
they can talk themselves out of a lot of situations. But, you see, and, they start off school and everything's great, and the teacher thinks they're doing great in kindergarten, and, things start to fall apart around third grade.
Mm-hmm.
And lots of times what happens is that child now either, can't cover it up anymore. They can't read, so they either become the class clown, they act up, they withdraw, they isolate themselves. They just do anything.
That's where you start to see all the emotional behavioral
Right.
things surface right there, right?
So
Yeah.
this is it starts as, so my plea is to parents, if you're seeing your child in kindergarten, first grade having, try to get them help as soon as possible.
Intervene earlier, right?
Intervene
Yeah.
as early as you can, and it then becomes a lot of haves and have-nots. A lot of people, and I think some of you have probably read about the lawsuits that are happening to different towns because kids didn't learn to read. And it's a lot of haves and have-nots, because if you're well off
Right.
and your child can't read, you get a tutor.
Right.
But if you're not, and I'm not blaming the teachers at all.
Right, right.
We were given a bill of goods that I was taught as, and it doesn't work. So I want to
Right.
give a little background on why we ended up in a reading program for not just your dyslexic kids, but
That's what I wanted. That's the question I want to ask. But I want to hear a little bit more about because you went on, in addition to get training in this, in Orton
Gillingham.
Yeah. Can you talk a little bit about, and then because then the big question is going to be, how did we get here? Which is the
Right.
next question I want to ask. But I want to talk about, because you had extensive training. That's not an easy. That's a really challenging program that you were trained in.
Yeah.
And then you also went on to work with. You had your own kind of tutoring, and you got to see you apply these methods and to do all this.
Right.
Can you talk a little bit about that?
Sure, it was.
It's a really kind of a really
intensive program that started in the summer with 5 days a week, 8-hour days, and people think, oh, well, they just need to learn phonics. The English language is pretty exciting, but there are a lot of rules that kids can learn, and there are a lot of words that don't follow.
You're right. Everything doesn't follow the whole phonetic code there. It's especially the English language is really so.
But you'd be amazed. Like 85% of the words do
that.
lot.
Yes.
Yeah. But so I ended up at Carroll School doing this program. It was that summer, and then a whole year long where I was, trained. I had observations constantly. I wasn't giving students just kind of like, oh, work with this kid and figure it out. It's Orton Gillingham is a very systematic approach to teaching reading, and it's based on science. It's scientifically based, and it's all about, it has a lot of phonemic awareness background, and it's very organized in how you start introducing sounds to children. And you can even take a older child that's having issues, and you can start at the beginning, and then you find out what they're missing. You race through all the stuff they know, but you can get to what they don't know.
And then you home in on that.
Right.
Yeah.
So it was fascinating for me to see these kids that were at Carroll School. Some of them were on scholarship, but many, it's a school for halves, because it's very expensive.
Right.
Because there's a lot of one-on-one. But to see the change.
That's what I was going to ask you, is how effective is it when you see a program that is scientifically based, evidence-based, and it works, doesn't it?
Well, and lots of times kids that come to Carroll School only go there for a few years. They get the toolbox, and then they can go back to their public school.
Yeah.
And I'm just, just so I can tell people how much it changes kids' lives. So one of my first students I had was a boy from Medfield, and and he made such great progress. I had him for 2 years as his tutor, and he had, was doing the whole program there. And then he called me when he was going, his mother asked him when he was graduating from high school, she said, can you tell me a couple of the teachers that made a big difference in your life? And I'm not patting myself on the back, but it was because of the program I was taught. He said, Mrs. Spillane. And she said, well, you should call her. And he called me, and talk about,
Yeah.
It was very emotional because he was failing and doing so poorly in his school. He came back to his school after, I think he might have been there 2 or 3 years, I think. Great athlete, did so well in school, went off to college, and, it was a success story.
Which makes it all the more important now to begin now to say, okay, how did we get here in our country that with all of the research that's out there, and that again, we can blame COVID for some stuff, that's for sure, but this was before that.
This was well before COVID.
So how did we get here? I know you started to talk about it, but continue talking about what happened, what changed, or,
Well, what happened, and I was a perfect, I would get out of this college and get my master's degree, and I don't know how to teach reading. I was like, why don't I know how to teach reading? And it's like, and I finally threw out all these books. To just give your listeners a short synopsis, Anne and I probably came from the same generation. We did come from the same generation, but we were taught either one way of reading was the Dick and Jane, which was whole sentence.
Look, see, spot.
It's a lot of
Right.
But there was another way of reading which was more phonetically based, like the cat sat on the mat.
Yes.
And I sadly can't remember what kind I have. But this is crazy, so that was the way we were taught. And many kids can just be exposed to reading, and they just kind of get it through osmosis. But there was this woman, Marie Clay, in New Zealand, and you're saying, why is she talking about New Zealand? Because really, she impacted what we do all over the United States up until a few years ago, and not only in the United States, in Britain, so it's Canada. So this, heart of gold, this woman, I'm sure, but Marie Clay, just wanted to help the struggling readers. And so she devised this program and she was like a guru. And so she came.
I remember that, yes.
You remember
following,
sure, yes, you followed her. I'm sure we all did. I always thought it was Marie Clay, but it's Marie Clay.
Good to know.
Yeah. So her approach was called the cueing system. And when you give a child a book, you're going to say, look at the pictures. What makes sense? So let's say the book is, Bill is on the horse or pony. And you say, Bill, and you say is on, and then you don't know that word, pony. And you look at the picture and you say, oh, that's a pony. And the teacher might say, does that make sense? Yes, that makes sense.
Yeah, I remember this.
Yeah, you remember. Does it sound right? Bill was on a pony. That does. But let's now, and we're going to just maybe look at that first letter. Oh, is it, that's the only time you would look at in just the first letter. No, that's not a P, that's an H. But can you think of a word that's like a pony, but it begins with H sound? And, you have to think, does a child that doesn't have a great socioeconomic background can pull these things out of their head? So, and of course, horse is not a great example because that's a hard word to sound out. But anyway, you get the point.
Yes.
So and this became the most popular method. She brought it to the United States, and those of us that were reading specialists all know the names Sue Pennell and Irene Fontes.
Yes.
And one was at Columbia, one was at Lesley College. They, again, were gods. And they started this program called guided reading.
Mm-hmm. And I remember that one.
Yes, this is the way you were taught to teach reading. And now you and I, well, you were a reading specialist, but I started teaching, my students that I began teaching were in 4th grade, so most of them knew how to read, but I couldn't help them, but they didn't really know. So this guided reading became the thing. And publishers made so much money.
Yeah.
It was brought all over the country, not just Massachusetts, all over the country, to schools, all the books and materials and the teacher training. And it also was taught in all the universities. To my point, I didn't learn how to teach reading. And every professor now becomes vested in this approach. They do research. They teach all their students. So you can see we're not going to change our minds quickly. And then it goes back to even back to George Bush, who wanted to start reading first. And whether you're Republican or Democrat or whatever, he and Laura really want to do some evidence-based reading instruction. But they met up with such a group of people that wouldn't let this program go off the ground. And Fontes and Pinnell went before Washington and said, oh, we do teach evidence-based, we do teach phonics. Well, if a teacher tells you in guided reading they really focus on phonics, they might have a whole phonics lesson, but they don't teach those skills that you learn in phonics when you're reading. So they teach the cueing method, so there's a big disconnect. So, but, well, how do we know that this didn't work? Well, along comes the 70s and 80s, and we can do MRIs.
Yeah.
And we can track kids' eye movements. So a lot of MRIs done on poor readers and good readers. They found that, whereas Marie Clay and Fontes and Pinnell don't want you to look at, they wanted whole language. They don't want you to look at each individual letter. They
don't want you to sound it.
No, they found out good readers, by tracking their eyes, do look, especially when you're beginning, do look at every letter. You process it very quickly, but do look, they could see their eyes stopping.
Yeah.
The poor readers did not. So now you have, and once you do this over and over again, like with a word like, let's say mat, you do that again, it becomes mapped in your memory.
Yeah.
And now you see it maybe 3 or 4 times, and now you don't have to sound it out.
Right, it's automatic, yeah.
But if you're doing these cueing things, nothing ever gets mapped in your memory. So it's like, wow, so we've known since the 1990s that this theory was totally, whole language was debunked.
Hence the lawsuits.
Yes, hence the lawsuits.
Wow, wow. And they're happening kind of all over, right?
But you say, well, 1990, that's 30 years ago.
No
What's
kidding.
happened since then?
Yeah.
And it's been in the background, and I'm not to say some schools didn't change, and lots of times a tutor would know to go back to the old way of doing phonics with these kids that were having trouble. But it wasn't a nationwide thing. So what brought it to the forefront in talking about the lawsuits is Emily Hanford, who's a New York Times reporter, educational reporter, since 2019, she's been wondering, why are kids not learning? Why are we dealing with the statistics that, 60% of the kids can't read beyond the 4th grade level? Why are we doing this? So she did a deep dive into all this research, and for any of your listeners, I highly recommend listening to her podcast called Told a Story. You can pick it up on any way you pick up your podcast. It's 12 episodes, do it on the way to work, whatever, when you're out walking. It is fascinating. And she investigated and found out why kids weren't reading. But because this podcast, in her writing, she's been all over the New York Times, came to the forefront, parents started to listen up.
Yeah.
And it wasn't the teachers that could change it. It wasn't the educators that could change it, the professors at college. It's the grassroots movement of parents who are irate and are talking about, why does my kid not know how to read?
Right.
I'm going to sue this community.
Wow.
And, not all parents, of course, are suing the community, but that's what's happening right now. And it's just, makes my blood boil.
Can you, and there's a couple of questions I want to follow up to that, but just shifting back to, and when I look back now and I see the impact on kids, can you talk a little bit about, though, what I referenced at the beginning is
Right.
when kids struggle with reading, what, its impact on their lives, can you just talk a little bit more about that? Because before I ask the rest of the questions,
Right.
I think that's something that people need to see, how important this issue is.
Well, as I said, I started originally teaching in 4th grade, and some of those kids were such poor readers, and I did not know how to help them.
Mm-hmm.
And, they just sometimes were labeled, oh, they just can't learn.
Yeah.
They just can't learn. And everybody, just about everybody, unless, there's some specific reason, can learn to read.
Yeah.
But reading is not like talking.
Yeah.
You learn talking by listening and practicing. Reading, on the other hand, has to be taught. And some kids, and we all know, maybe your own children or kids would have this instruction in school and just still became fluent readers quickly.
Yeah.
They didn't need much. And that is wonderful. And some kids, that's just the way they are. And this whole new approach to reading, is not new. It's an old approach. It doesn't harm anybody. So a child that doesn't need it sails through it and just...
That's right.
Yeah. But for the child, and 60% of kids need this explicit
Right.
instruction, and they're not getting it. So, Anne, going back to your question, what happened to those kids in school?
Yeah.
They were the kids that would act out.
That's it, like you were saying.
Yeah.
Yeah.
In
they
4th
do.
grade, you'd already, kids were, you get a recommendation, oh, watch out for that kid, he's
And
really
how they
absent.
feel
I
about
know.
themselves, and then they lose that confidence,
Right.
that, and so many, like you hit, and I was talking to someone recently, she has an adult son who has gone on to do incredible things, but he struggled with reading all along, and he thought he can make fun of it now, how he felt as a kid in school.
Yeah.
He felt like a dummy, and he
Right.
was a sharp and funny kid, but a lot of people don't help them recognize their gifts and things like that, and they go along believing, and it derails so many of them. That's why this is such an important issue, isn't it?
It is.
Right?
Because we can see it creates a mental health crisis.
Yeah, that's it.
And that's not to say because you're a poor reader, you're going to have mental health issues, but the connection between being a poor reader and mental health issues is
Yeah.
quite a correlation.
But now, the other thing, too, and you hit the nail on the head on this one as well, and I think it's more true now than ever before, is many teachers do not know how to teach reading. One of the most important fundamental things that teachers need to be able to teach across every grade
Right.
level, high school, there are all
Right.
different kinds of reading and content and how to comprehend. From your perspective, what's happening with teacher training? What's happening with has this risen to the point now that colleges are recognizing it and training teachers and teachers coming out with that? What's your sense of that?
Well, it's not a sense, I know.
Yeah.
It just became a mandate as of 2024 in
Oh, wow.
Massachusetts that teachers have to be taught about the systematic approach to reading.
Just since, wow.
Yes.
Holy smoke.
I have to tell you, there's also a side. Mississippi used to be labeled the worst state in the country as far as literacy rates go. They adopted a systematic approach to reading quite a few years ago. They are #1 in the country now.
No way.
Really?
I had no
Yeah.
idea.
So, it can be done, but
Yeah.
we're behind the 8 ball. It takes time.
But yeah.
So your teachers that are just graduated from probably Massachusetts colleges as of last June, I can probably say maybe did not get any of this training.
Wow. Wow.
So what we're doing, and Governor Healy is on top of this, but Massachusetts was slow. New Hampshire adopted this a few years ago. Governor Healy.
This is so unlike Massachusetts.
Yeah, I know.
Because we're usually the front runner.
Well, and what I realized that why Fontes and Pinnell became so popular was because we're a liberal state, And the idea is if you create that cozy reading nook with all
Yes.
these great books, they're just going to learn to read like magic.
That's
And, you know, and God knows that's so boring. Ass as like an apple. That's so boring. Our kids deserve better. So that's, I think,
that's really
Mississippi is known for being
that's
liberal.
right. Isn't that interesting?
Yeah, it really is, and that was what the fight was between. You know, this is going to drown our kids. They'll hate reading if they have to learn all these foolish sounds.
Can you talk about initiative? And this isn't bragging, or this is just in terms of the work that you're doing now, and you've made kind of a commitment to. Instead of just talking about it, you're doing something about it. Can you talk a little bit about your partnership with you're supporting a partnership with the Boston Public Schools? Can you speak a little bit about that?
Right. Well, I'm still involved because I love the Carroll School.
Yeah.
I think they do a fabulous job. So, again, during the pandemic, I worried about so many of those Boston City school kids that weren't even having Zoom school, and thinking, oh my gosh, these kids are going to be so behind in reading. And I knew that they would benefit from this kind of explicit instruction. I knew they weren't getting it. So I have talked to them. You know, I've been involved in Carroll School is partnering with just one public school. So this is, I don't even want to name the school, but
Sure.
But one public school where they're bringing people that are trained in Orton Gillingham into this public school, and they've got 35 of these teachers in this school signed up to do all this after-school training. And you know, we all know sometimes when people are on, they have a union. That's well, the union doesn't say you should do that.
Yeah.
So they're committed to it. And this is going to be, they've also got a grant to study the results. This is not touchy-feely. This will be measured.
Evidence-based.
Evidence-based.
Yeah.
And so it just, as a matter of fact, I have not gone to see the school yet. They just started in September. I'm going for a school visit in February to see how the teachers are doing and how, they need to be supported, because doing this in an isolated way is very difficult. You need to have it across your, you need to have all your teachers know it and support each other. And a lot of this has come by. We did pass a law in Massachusetts where dyslexic kids now have to be tested. I believe it's starting in kindergarten, tested at least twice a year. Can't quote me on that. So they're finding, not like, oh, they'll catch up.
Yeah.
They're finding more kids are dyslexic. And dyslexic, if you ever get this diagnosis for your child, is not a death sentence at all.
Right.
We always like to quote Albert Einstein was dyslexic.
That's right.
That dyslexic kids can learn to read as well as anybody, but they need to be explicitly taught.
But what I'm wondering about now is when you look at some of the financial crisis that's impacting schools across, the state, in terms of money for professional development, it seems like that's a crucial piece of where money needs to go, and maybe the state can support more funding for training in that. In other words, because we know that towns are just, they don't, these mandates that are coming down, they can't afford them. This is crucial. I'm wondering, is the state putting money behind this?
That's what I wanted.
Oh,
Governor
good.
Healy
Good.
has passed what she's calling a literacy launch, and $30 million has been in the 2025 budget has been dedicated to teacher training, professional development, materials, also support. So this is great news for your 2 and 3 year olds, because by the time they're hitting learning to read, this will hopefully be well established. They also, that it has to be an evidence-based reading approach, not necessarily Orton Gillingham. Barbara Wilson has a great one out. And as of 2025, they're requiring all universities, teacher colleges, to require programs to teach an evidence-based method of reading. So we are seeing change, but it's like for a lot of kids, it's too late.
But you hit the nail on the head also when you were talking about haves and have-nots, because and we know what happens. It's if you have the wherewithal, to get you know, number one, to be an advocate and
Right.
to go out and then be able to get tutors and to do all of this. It's tough, isn't it?
No,
You can
when
see that divide.
I knew when you're trying to put money on the table when you're
Yeah.
during COVID, you have to go work in the grocery store and your kid's home alone. I mean, it's just,
Yeah.
it's so sad.
Yeah.
So it's just, I'm really thrilled that Governor Healy's doing this. Wish it happened before,
Yeah.
but you just take what you have
No,
now.
that's
so,
kidding.
So this and the partnership Carroll School has, hopefully that
It's a model, isn't it?
it will be a model
Yeah.
so that, you know, they might decide, Boston Public Schools might decide, oh, this is a good model. We're going to adopt this model that Carroll School has brought into this particular
Yeah,
school.
yeah.
So I don't know where that's going to go.
But that's pretty
Yeah.
cool that you're doing that, and not, you know, I know you're not wanting to take a lot of credit for it, but the fact that you've been behind this, and it's important in this world today to not just talk about stuff, but to take action and do stuff if you can
Right.
do something, right? You know,
Right,
it's-
and this takes a lot of funding, and you know,
Yeah.
just you know, I'm very privileged that I can
Yeah.
help this out.
Yeah.
You know, so and then as you know, what SAFE does is just, I mean, as you talked about in your introduction, there is such a correlation between low literacy abilities and drug use
Yeah.
and incarceration. I mean,
But incarceration, especially, I forgot that whole
Oh, my God.
that whole statistic. But you're absolutely right. I forgot
mean,
that
yeah.
whole connection.
74% of third graders read poorly and still struggle when they're in ninth grade. Third grade reading scores predict students' likelihood to graduate from high school.
Mm-hmm.
Acting out withdrawal, we talked about that. Students who drop out of high school are 5 times
Mm-hmm.
more likely to be arrested. 5 times
Yeah.
more likely.
Yeah.
That's you know, and we know what percentage of kids drop out of high school, and we also know what kids get a high school diploma but they still can't read.
Right.
We know they're pushed
That's right.
along.
Absolutely.
So there is a strong correlation between low literacy skills and exploding incarceration
Yeah.
rates. You know, these kids, you know, you're 17, you can't read beyond the 4th grade level. What does that mean? You can't hold down a good job.
That's it.
You hold down, you know, a job maybe no one else wants. It's not fulfilling. So you might commit a crime to make some money,
No.
sell some drugs, you know.
And then there's the self-medication because
Oh.
there's that whole feeling of worthlessness and hopelessness and frustration. And they say, oh, how do I soothe myself? And that's when you see a lot of this stuff going on too, right? Yeah.
Right. So
Yeah.
the kids that might not be acting out criminally might be acting out quietly in their bedroom at home
Yeah.
with drugs and medication and just to stop the pain and stop them from making
It
feel
speaks,
bad.
it speaks
badly.
so much to the importance of this issue, doesn't it? So just the last thing I was going to ask you is, when you think now about what parents can be doing at home,
Right.
you know, what they should be doing, and you know, we don't want them to turn into, say, teachers and drilling their kids all the time. But what about, like, say, reading aloud? And what are the things that when we're talking to parents about what right now in terms of reading, and I don't know, it's just like these kids who aren't reading too, you know, it's just, can you talk a little bit about that, you know?
Well, that's what's so sad. I mean, of course, we always encourage reading aloud. And, you know, most of us put our faith in schools to teach my child how to read. And so many parents are realizing my kid didn't learn how to read because, they don't want to blame the teacher.
Yeah.
That's how the teacher was taught.
Right.
So what can you do? I mean, I hate to say it, but, you know, I think you should go to your school and find out, you know, what
Yeah.
program they're using and, you know,
Be advocates, right?
Be advocates,
Yeah.
and
Ask questions.
and if, you know, I know so many people don't have the time. They're parents are working, and it's hard to, you know, to think at night after working all day, you're going to sit down and quiz your child. But if you can do a little bit of it, it would be great. But, you know, and there are so many inexpensive phonemic-based, and, you know, even work pages that
Sure.
you can practice at home with your child, and, you know,
Not overdoing it, but just,
No.
you know, just for
Just-
fun, maybe, you know,
yeah,
a few
to-
minutes. That's
to support.
yeah.
And then when you're reading at home, I mean, it's great to read books that the child just can curl up next to you and just read that they might not be able to read. But if you choose a book that has a lot of words you think your first grader could read, you don't ask them to read every word, but you come to that word cat and say, let's look at that word. Let's sound that out. Mom, I always have trouble with that word,
Yeah.
Say, let's sound it out and, make a game of it and but don't overdo it.
Right.
Like maybe pick 2 words on a page that
Right.
can be broken down easily into.
But like you
don't
said, make a
pick
game.
lamb.
Right.
Don't pick lamb.
But like you said, make a game of it, make it fun.
And just don't make it too stressful.
Right.
So that would be, and just do talk to your teachers at school. And I'm sure that they're all aware of it. And if you find that your teacher isn't, ask them, send them a link to this podcast because it's very powerful.
That should be some part of teacher training, almost like staff meetings or something, to show some of those episodes and things like that.
Right.
Because I particularly worry about not just learning to read, but like I said, the training, say, that high school teachers get. Because I think that there's so much work that needs to be done in teaching kids how to comprehend material, and kids don't even, we assume they know how to do all this, they know how to study, so go home and study. Most kids have no idea how to study. They look at the page and they look really hard at the page, but there's so many skills that we need to be teaching, but it's asking the right questions, isn't it, as parents, right?
Yeah, and there should always be a study skills class for kids.
Are you kidding me?
We both have our index
That's
cards
right.
here, and whatever that works for a child.
Yeah.
But how, study for your exam tomorrow. I don't know. Oh, I'm supposed to. I don't know how to take notes. I didn't.
That's right, and they don't know how to study. They don't know to pace it out.
Right.
Tonight you do this and do this, and when you ask college people on college campuses, they say the biggest thing that they're finding with kids is time management.
Right.
They do not know how to do any of this kind of stuff. So there's a lot there, but I think becoming advocates is crucial, isn't it? Is there anything else that you wanted to mention that I didn't ask you?
Well, you brought it up when we first started about you worry about with social media and these kids' attention spans.
Right.
And are all becoming less and less. Everything's about, what's on TikTok or, and it's fast, and click, click, click. And even when you're dating, it's click, click, click,
Yeah.
And so, the hard thing is nobody sits with anything for a long time.
Yeah.
And, if you can, as a parent, model that behavior, show your child that you have a book in your hand.
But you see, I wish I'd asked this. I'm glad you're bringing this up, because one of the things we, in dealing with like the mental health task force in the schools, is the impact of social media, that it is absolutely undermining every aspect of our kids' lives. And if parents don't intervene there, and you're not going to take it away from kids, but at least
there is a big movement to right here in Massachusetts that no longer will cell phones be allowed in school.
Oh, in school, right?
In school.
But they're staying awake all night long.
Exactly.
They're not, and they're trying to do homework with their cell phones. Right? They're not concentrating on any of this stuff. But it's what's happening outside of school. Then parents think, oh, it's good. My kids they're safe. They're in the bedroom and they're on social. But the stuff that's happening on social media, and then how it's undermining every aspect. So I think that meshes. I'm so glad you brought that up, because it's making sure that parents really limit that, right? In terms of,
and I kind of see with my grandchildren. You might ask the parents, do you have any guns at home? But you also, do you let your kids on social media? My oldest grandchild is only 10. She's not allowed to be on TikTok, but she knows everything about it because her friends are on it.
That's right. It's the culture,
The parents, some parents allow it.
Yeah.
It's just, and I think even our Surgeon General brought this up, that we have got to stop this. And anything you read, the greatest gift you can give your child is to take away that cell phone, and at least till they're at least 12. So if you can, but it's a lot of parental pressure.
It is.
Oh, my kids, everyone has it,
But just limiting it. Like we used to suggest, just at night, make sure they put them outside the bedroom, because they're staying awake all night. And the stuff that they're doing, it's really scary now. It really is. But that's a good message to get. And like you said, it's really modeling too. It's having them see you read books, bringing books into the home. That doesn't cost a lot to go to the library if you can't, But
and parents, don't be on your phone.
Right.
No phones allowed at dinner.
That's killing kids.
No phone. And you see, if mom's on it, dad's on it, then of course you're going to be on it.
And that we know that how kids feel about that when their parents they don't have their attention, and it's just. But this is a good way to close it out, because I think that's But there is hope. It's being an advocate. Things are changing.
They are changing.
And I just want to say, appreciate the work that you're doing and calling attention to this. It's really important. So, and I want to thank everyone for tuning in today. I want to thank our producer, Chris Flynn, and local cable access, because cable TV brings so many important topics to the community, covers government meetings, especially in this day and age. We need to be able to have access to what's happening in the political situation around us, factual stuff where you can actually sit and view it and interact at these government meetings. So again, thank you all for joining us, and thank you, my guest, Joanne Spillane. Thank you.
This program was made possible by your Franklin friends and neighbors, good folks just like you. Thanks for supporting Franklin TV. And thanks for watching.